now we have the second panel discussion coming up. And we will talk about increased demand for virtual services and tech innovations fueled by the pandemic. We're talking about lots about the pandemic, but that's inevitable, right? So let's now welcome on the stage. We have with us Lars-Inge Sjöqvist again from Gapwaves. And we have with us Lukman Ramsey, Global Solution Manager at Google. He will be with us on the stage. And we have with us Anatoly Ilyaich, who's Vice President Networks and Managed Pre-Sales at Ericsson. Please take a seat. And let's see if we can get Lukman Ramsey from Google with us online. Yeah, you can see. That's perfect. All right, we're a few minutes early, so maybe he is not ready yet, Lukman Ramsey, but we'll just start soft and sweet here, so we'll see when he joins us. We're going to talk about increased dependency on software and cloud services, and that has been putting a higher requirement, of course, on cybersecurity. We addressed that previously a little bit. And in terms of your work, how does that impact your strategy?
I think
Ericsson's perspective.
Thank you. Yeah. In Ericsson, this in principle has two areas. One is what we do with our customers, and secondly, how we create our own IT environment to enable this, let's say, remote work. But if we first talk about the security for the solutions that we do and the benefits of our solutions to customers, then I can say that in both major areas, or I would say in core, cloud, and in radio, but also in services, we introduce a lot of mechanisms in our solutions which, let's say, address the area of cybersecurity. And if before with 2G, 3G, and even 4G, most of the protocols were proprietary and not that going towards the open world like it's going now. So that was not that, let's say, problematic, and most of the security issues for the customers were solved through perimeter security and all the mechanisms of how you secure.
It's a different ballgame now.
Absolutely. But now, when basically security risks and threats can come from network nodes, it can come from applications, from devices, from terminals, mobile, fixed, from applications over the tops, you name it. The magnitude and the complexity of potential threats has increased. So in Ericsson solutions that we provide to customers, we have, let's say, inbuilt mechanisms which are also guided by international standardization organizations like 3GPP, ETSI, and likewise, where by standard you have much higher security than you have in other, let's say, other type of non-standardized solutions which are also available for IoT and other areas on the market. So I would say that our solutions are, let's say, by standard and default are much more secured now going towards 5G. And for internally, of course, especially pandemic and what happened with COVID-19 affected a lot. And I think Ericsson has done a great job so that the systems work smoothly, and it allows basically, the huge company of Ericsson of plus minus 100,000 people work remotely.
And still being secure.
And still being secured, and I can say when we dial up and connect to the network, it all takes, seconds, not like maybe 5 years ago. So it's been a tremendous transformation in that area, even for how we work and how we access and the applications we choose. For example, if we had a number of applications that couldn't manage, such a high load, many people in video mode conferencing, then now we are moving towards applications where this is basically not a problem, up to 100 people can participate. So that's what I'm saying, that as a summary, that both externally but also internally, I think we are addressing this security threat very seriously.
So it's almost like this has been a sort of a pressure cooker that you really had to speed up your work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's, in a way, it's a good thing.
Well, It's always balance, yeah?
Of course, of course. So Lars-Inge, in terms of your company, Gapwaves, how has this impacted your strategy?
I would say, as we are not the size as Ericsson, of course, we are a very small company. All the systems we are using, etc., is already from the beginning cloud-based. So it's quite easy for us to adapt to this change in how to work. Working from home, etc., has been quite easy. We haven't seen any big problems in that from our side. When you should make deals, it's sometimes a little bit difficult to do that by a team meeting or something like that.
Because you don't feel that it's a secure platform?
No, it's not about that. It's more about that convincing people is always a little bit different when you sit in the same room or if you are on distance, so to say. So that could be a problem. But in total, I would say that the security, we anyway see that we have to step up a little bit in having two, what you call that, two level of sign-on, etc. Because it has been more attacks coming on into us as well.
We see that, of course.
Yeah, but in general, I would say for our company, I think it's a good thing is that we are not traveling as much as we did before.
Saves a lot of time, a lot of carbon, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So this year's ISO 9000 or 14001 goals for the environmental impact is very good for our sake, and I think that's the same for Ericsson as well. But not just laughing at it, but it's giving an understanding that we can work a lot more on distance with no problem. That we have learned quickly.
Indeed, we have.
Yeah.
We now have with us from Google, Lukman Ramsey. We started a few minutes early, beg your pardons for that. You're a global solution manager at Google, and we are talking about increased demand for virtual services and tech innovation fueled by the pandemic. Welcome to the program.
Thank you all.
In terms of Google's strategy to handle cybersecurity in this field in the light of the pandemic, what can you tell us?
Well, first of all, just by way of further introduction, I work on the Google Cloud team with the public sector division. So I've been focused on delivering solutions to state and local government. And that's really a global mandate, although obviously I spend most of my time on the US. I'm based in New York City. Well, that my mandate also includes education as part of public sector. So there's been obviously a big impact on both of those areas in the pandemic. I wouldn't say that in terms of security that has been a real focus for us. I mean, obviously delivering cloud services, there's always a security component to that, and companies who are considering moving operations to the cloud have always we've always have to deal with the security implications of that. But I would say the things that we've been focusing on primarily include things like managing public health, forecasting disease. I do a lot of work in AI and analytics, and there's been a huge demand for analytics in this era, and not just with government, but also education. With the move to remote schooling, school districts and teachers and everybody who's involved in delivering education have been a lot more concerned about data, meaning having data on what their students are doing, whether they're actually attending or logging in, tracking their progress, because they don't have as direct of a connection to the students as they did before. And then similarly on the government and public sector side, there's been a huge demand for analytics, for the ability to manage things like contact tracing and disease forecasting. So I have been spending a lot of my effort and time on those areas.
Well, thank you very much. It sounds like you have had to sort of develop your techniques while walking, sort of learning by doing in this process. Has this been a case of increased speed of learning that has been in favor of your company, you would say, due to the circumstances?
Well, you know, so Google has been well placed, I think, to from a business standpoint to address all the challenges related to the pandemic. We have an extensive footprint in education, and the tools that many school districts are using globally are Google tools, things like Google Classroom and G Suite for education. The Meet, obviously we have a major video conference product, Google Meet. So yeah, we've been well positioned. At the same time, obviously, our main source of revenue is advertising, and that took a little bit of a hit, certainly as the economies globally slowed down. We're starting to see that pick back up again, but there'll be some time before it fully recovers.
Well, thank you very much. In terms of your clients, let's go back to you, Anatoly. How has the pandemic affected the demand for your services in a global perspective?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that first, Ericsson has done quite deep analysis of what is going on with networks globally, and that has affected obviously networks from Latin America to Asia, and identified basically three main areas that affected mostly operators world, and operators are the main customers to Ericsson. So number one was that the traffic went from from urban areas to suburban to regional areas where people live, and because of the mobility constraints, so obviously that affected also the roaming, which is one of the main revenues to operators. But in addition to that decentralization of people, we have also admitted the voice becoming a very critical service suddenly, because people's social life has suffered, and people had to talk more often, and duration of the calls was much longer. So you can say that the fixed networks mainly grew in traffic from 20 to 100%. So not so much mobile, because on the mobile network you can sort of balance the rural with the urban, and on the network level it plus minus stayed the same across the world. But on the fixed network, fixed operators had to secure the extra capacity to provide that to subscribers. But also, even from the mobile point of view, but also fixed the uplink, due to home teleconferencing and video calls, people work at home. The uplink became
huge increase.
Much higher. So that all led to that operators had to, dynamically reconsider the optimization services, the planning, the cell planning of how the network is being built, so that it had to be adjusted to the new realities, because you have high loaded cells in the center of the cities, which suddenly become free, but you had very little traffic in the suburban areas, which suddenly become overloaded, and how to increase that capacity. So operators had to reconsider basically how they cope with the effect of pandemic across the world. So from that point of view, that was the major effect that operators saw, and Ericsson of course helped them with both network expansions, but also optimization services, which we now have with AI and machine learning, and some kind of remote configuration and remote tuning mechanisms that we are now introducing globally. So that's
Would you say that this transformation has been a successful one? I mean, it's been a huge challenge on both on Ericsson, but also on all your clients.
Well, it has been, and since the increase of this traffic happened, I think operators, even mobile operators, admitted the need for higher capacities, and that's why suddenly 5G has a different angle now to speed up. And for those operators that provide, let's say, broadband mobile services, be it fixed wireless access or some kind of specific industry offerings, that has sort of generated a new way for new spectrum and for new capacity, even in mobile networks, not only in fixed.
Thank you. In New York, Lukman, Ramsey, you've been under extreme pressure from COVID. From Google's perspective, do you feel that your services have been put to use and developed properly? I mean, or do you still have more capacity to share in the situation that is in New York City, for instance? I mean, has the networks been able to adapt, like Anatoly presented?
Sorry, I was
Here we
muted.
go.
No, we haven't seen any problems with network capacity per se. I mean, as other speakers noted, there has been a shift. You know, folks obviously not going into the office really anywhere globally at Google. In fact, Sundar, our CEO, has said that not to expect to be back in the office until June. So as a result, you know, everybody's been working from home. And there is increased demand for network services related to that. I mean, we because of security concerns, we often have to VPN into the local office network, and then from there access corporate services. But folks like myself had already been doing that for the previous few years, so it wasn't really too much of a challenge related, network-wise at least, related to that. I mean, I think. As other callers have noted, other speakers noted earlier, there has been an adjustment for all of us, this different kind of cadence of work, working from home, not traveling, not getting in front of customers, as I think someone noted earlier, does make it harder to sell. But no, I think in terms of our infrastructure, Google's has a very, very robust infrastructure, and so far it has stood up to the increased challenges posed by the pandemic.
Thank you, Martin, very much. I'm going to stay with you for one more question that I'm going to go to Lars-Inge with the same question. What would you say is the biggest learning that you can draw from COVID, from Google's perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that this need for data to be integrated into business operations that maybe traditionally have not taken as advantage of data. Again, in the areas that I work or focus on in government and in education, this need really to be able to track what's going on, to use analytics to predict what's going on has been a huge impact, has a huge impact on the solutions that we're developing. So again, a huge need to be able to forecast the progression of disease and to be able to model policy decisions. So to be able to predict the impact of opening different industries or closing them down. These are things that we've really struggled with alongside our customers to help them solve those problems. And I'm sure that as a result, we're having, as you said, to learn on the fly. But as a result, we will definitely be more prepared in the future for events like this. We've had to build a new set of solutions that are tailored for these kinds of use cases. And I really feel that, certainly in the area of disease management, that we will be much better prepared going forward, both us and our customers.
Well, thank you. Lars-Inge Sjöqvist from Gapwaves. What is Gapwaves, your perspective on Gapwaves' biggest learnings from during the COVID situation?
I was thinking of two major things in this case, and typically what we have seen, how fast things can change. What we see now when the pandemic has grown and there has been a problem for many people, the e-shopping, so to say, buying things over the internet is driving quickly the need of also deliveries to our households, etc. And we have seen a very quick change in some of the customers we work with, need for having better equipment for this and doing it without people. That's these last mile delivery robots, which is growing very quick now.
Because the customers expect it to be fossil free.
The business has grown quickly. And the biggest cost in that chain is really the last mile delivery. So why don't just do a lot more on that now? And we see that typically from US coming more and more. So then that is one thing which we have felt quite a lot, and we also are in the middle of it, so to say, so it's a good thing for us as a company. On the other hand, I was talking with one of the big tier 1 customers last week, and they told us that the problem with selling this kind of radar equipment to cars is decreasing during this period. And in total, the company had to lay off some people. But at the same time, the future things for most companies is taking on new things, new technology. Ericsson is doing that all the time, for example, Google as well, I'm sure. But we also see that this typical tier 1, which is a quite traditional business working with automotive industry, they also have to switch quicker.
It's sort of a leapfrogging movement that has to take place. Yeah.
So we feel more confident today than a half a year ago, I would say. The speed for change over to use our type of technology, which is a good sign as well.
And you mentioned the last mile transport, and I think I tried to interrupt you more or less, saying that people require this to be, they want it to be fossil free, because that's the expectation now.
Yeah,
and that's a good thing for your company.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Add a few words to what you say. I think number of learnings that we have seen lately is that the demand for remote services has increased. Yes, so it's not only the fact that people can't do the job themselves, but it's also the cost-saving exercise in many cases. So that's why we are introducing a lot of machine learning and artificial intelligence in the way we work with networks. And we do for example, things like virtual drive tests. So if all operators, including Tele and any other Vodafones and Telefonicas of the world, they have been spending a lot of money per year in their OPEX expenditures to actually drive cars to make sure that the quality of mobile broadband is there. And then different neutral organizations were testing the quality of those networks. Then now with our new solutions, we're able to do to achieve the same effect or even better remotely. So introduction of this kind of offerings has been super popular and really well accepted by operators globally. Then I would say the second learning is maybe more psychological, that actually it was a super big stress for all people, not only for 100,000 of Ericsson's people, but also for all customers and all subcontractors and everyone. So I think that this brave period of time that we have all survived and overcome all these issues with technology and choosing the right application for telecommuting and video calls and all these things instead of traveling and seeing face to face. So I think this psychological effect will also be with us for a long time.
Do you think this will make us more brave and more sort of able to leapfrog in other aspects? It's a leading question.
Yeah, I think in a way we are becoming much more, let's say, to the point. Yeah, because when you meet face to face, you allow yourself a little bit, maybe spending too much time on something else. But when you are in the video call, I think you are trying to be a little bit more sharp, and this is going across all the areas.
Lukman, from New York, initially you talked about that your application has been used very much so in the school system in this situation. Could you elaborate a little bit on this, and how do you think this will be taken forward into the future, hopefully after the pandemic is over? We don't know that yet when it will be, but eventually we hope, of course.
Yeah, so there's been a tremendous impact to education, really, again, across the globe. And, what we saw in the spring was that there was this sudden shift to remote schooling, and school districts were not prepared. They had to kind of innovate on the fly. And so the use of tools like Google Classroom, which is kind of an LMS, or a learning management system, that's built into our G Suite for Education product. The use of that suddenly skyrocketed, and we had some challenges to do with scale, but we made very quick adjustments, and that wasn't as much of a problem as dealing with 100 million new users that all had requests for features to help with remote schooling. And so we had to make very quick adjustments, and all of the schooling was happening through video. And so if you recall, there was a lot of security concerns around video calls early on, not necessarily with our products, but with other tools that ultimately cast a shadow on what we were doing. And so we did have to reassure people about security. We made some security changes to our video product, so that it wasn't as easy for folks that weren't registered with the school district to get into a call. They had to be approved by whoever set up the call. So yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time back in the spring working with my local district, just helping them navigate all of the technology concerns, and not just working with the district officials, but also parents and students. Everybody had to make a very, very rapid adjustment. I think, in the fall, as school has restarted, mostly across the US, school is still happening, at least for the primary grades. School is still happening remotely. I mean, there is some in-person instruction. There's some hybrid models where some days school students are in, and then some days they're remote. And what we see is that folks have adapted quite well. I mean, I think everybody would still prefer for school to be in person, but the use of technology is, at least the people that have become a lot more comfortable with the Google tools that are involved in this. But I think globally the use of technology has obviously people have accommodated. And so I think to your point, this is probably going to have some degree of a permanent change. I think we as parents and as educators all want students to be back in class as soon as possible. But now that we've gotten this experience with remote schooling, I'm sure that there will be, we will take more advantage of the remote schooling in the future. So there has been some permanent change. I just want to touch on one more thing before I start. The other thing I work on is the application of AI to education. And we've seen a huge increase in interest in that area. So we're building tools, for example, that help generate assignments and assessments and questions for students. It's really tools that help education scale, so that less of the burden is placed on the instructor or the teacher, the educator. And we use AI to power those experiences. And again, there's been a huge increase in interest there. And I'm sure that this pandemic will spur a lot of advancements in AI applied to education.
Well, thank you very much. I have one final last question that goes to all three of you. Would you like to start, Anatoly, to answer? We're going to talk about trade tensions, because we see the trade tensions between the two superpowers, large economies. How do you handle this strategically in this pandemic situation? It's really sort of been escalating in the light of what's happening.
In order to understand Ericsson's position in this question, I would go maybe to a few years back to mid-2010, so 15, 16, 17, where Ericsson was not in the best shape. And I think Ericsson was in right time to acknowledge that. And actually, with the new CEO that we have now, Börje Ekholm, so we have reassessed the position of Ericsson and the strategy, and focused on, created so-called new focus strategy. And that implied focus on technological leadership. And with that, we increased significantly the R&D resources. So it was thousands of people employed, new budgets, and so on. And by that, basically until 5G became the standard, which is then 2018-19, then in a few steps, we have reached the position in our technology, in our products, that are basically superior on the market. So when this geopolitical story happened with Chinese and American and so on, so we luckily feel ourselves actually strong, not based on the preferences of certain powers that it should be Ericsson or not Ericsson, but on the own merits of our equipment. And we do a lot of so-called TCO studies where we analyze the technological advances and the software that we are leading, that we're introducing, and which are becoming then global standards, like, I don't know, reusing existing LTE frequencies for 5G as well at the same time as introducing new bands in 5G, or providing, as Hanna mentioned earlier, different solutions for Industry 4.0, which is then, in between mobile broadband and critical IoT solutions and industrial IoT for multiple of industries and so on. So I think the breadth of Ericsson solutions now in core radio and also services, as I said, remote services and different new tools, actually speak for ourselves. So we are not really betting on this. Of course, we get certain, let's say, maybe contracts in certain part of the world because of this geopolitical story. But on the other hand, we have other parts of the world where we don't get contracts because of that. So I think it's all kind of a matter of balance, but I'm sure that we are not, let's say, focusing on this as the element of our, successful sales strategy. That is for sure not.
Well, that's must be feeling quite great to be able to say this. Lars-Inge Sjöqvist, from Gapwaves' perspective, the geopolitical situation.
Yeah, it is that looking in our case, we do have customers both in US, in Asia, and in Europe. Our own people are working in Sweden mostly, but we have supplier collaboration, both in Sweden and Europe, and now we also have in Asia. But we can't use them all for all kind of customers. So we also have suppliers around in Europe now to support some of the business we are going into. So for us, it's very strategic, important that we can deliver at the same time as we also need to find the good pricing for the products. So it's for us, it's quite what you call it practical how to work with this, because this isn't the case.
The waters, carefully.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Google, that's a big question for a big company. How you navigate in the geopolitical situation?
We, I would say overall it hasn't had much of an impact on us. We already we're really not operating that much in China. We do have teams there. We do some research there, but Google Cloud, where I work, does not actually have a data center footprint in China at all. But we have data centers and offices everywhere else, and we actually do have an office in Beijing and a couple other places in China. But it hasn't been much of a change for us. The only one thing I might point out is on the data center side, as we're building out data centers across the globe, there has been some impact to the supply chain and the sourcing of parts there, but we're starting to see that mitigate already. So in terms of delivering products and services, we don't have that much of a footprint in China today. and it hasn't really changed much.
Well, thank you very much from New York with us, Lukman Ramsey from Global Solutions. He is Global Solutions Manager at Google. And we say thank you to Anatoly Ilyaich from Ericsson and to Lars-Inge Sjöqvist from Gapwaves for sharing your insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.